The Cathar Dominion operated on principles as rigid and elegant as their crystalline physiology. Their civilization was built upon the unshakable foundation of logic, quantifiable data, and the absolute, immutable laws governing the physical universe. Emotion was a data artifact, unpredictable and inefficient. Biology was a complex but ultimately deterministic system. Medicine, therefore, was an exercise in precise diagnostics and protocol adherence. Advanced, yes, capable of cellular regeneration and sophisticated nanite therapies, but utterly bound by what was known and provable. Deviations from established physical or biological parameters were not challenges to be overcome. They were errors in the system, anomalies signaling irreparable damage. On board the Kepler's Hope research station, orbiting the temperamental red dwarf star Viridian Prime, this philosophy manifested in the pristine, silent efficiency of the Cathar Medical Bay. Chief Medical Officer Unit 734, a towering figure of intersecting translucent planes that refracted the station's cool lighting, oversaw its operations. Unit 734 perceived its human counterparts in the adjacent human sector medical bay with a detached, analytical curiosity. Headed by Dr. Alara Vance, a woman whose calm demeanor couldn't quite hide the spark of restless energy in her eyes, the human team was different. Competent, certainly, particularly Dr. Jayan Lee, their lead trauma surgeon with unnervingly fast hands, and Anya Sharma, a biotech wizard who seemed to treat complex diagnostic systems like personal friends. But they were prone to inefficient emotional displays, frustration, elation, concerning levels of empathy for damaged biological units, and their medbay often buzzed with a low level of controlled chaos that Unit 734 found mildly grating. Kepler's Hope itself was a testament to interspecies cooperation, built specifically to study Viridian Prime's volatile nature. The star regularly emitted waves of exotic particles and generated minor, localized spacetime distortions, phenomena that fascinated Cathar physicists and human astrophysicists alike, albeit for different reasons. The Cathar sought to codify the anomalies within existing frameworks. The humans seemed to revel in the sheer weirdness of it all. Both races knew the risks, but believed the station's state-of-the-art containment fields, designed primarily by Cathar engineers, were sufficient. They were wrong. It began with a flicker in the station's internal gravity, followed by a surge of static across all comm channels. Then, the alarms blared, not the standard yellow alert for a solar flare, but the piercing crimson shriek of catastrophic containment failure. Viridian Prime hadn't just flared. It had unleashed a complex wave pulse, a simultaneous eruption of high-energy radiation intertwined with a ripping shear in local subspace. The station shuddered violently as the wave front washed over it. Lights exploded in showers of sparks. Secondary containment fields buckled, flickering like dying embers before collapsing entirely in several science labs and connecting corridors. Chaos erupted. Emergency bulkheads slammed shut, sometimes trapping personnel. Power fluctuated wildly, plunging sections into darkness before emergency lighting kicked in. Through the discordant symphony of alarms and structural groans came the first panicked calls to the medical bays. Reports flooded in, laced with disbelief and terror. Personnel caught in the primary wave weren't just burned or irradiated in the conventional sense. They were reporting impossibilities. A Cathar engineer trapped near a ruptured plasma conduit, whose silicate body seemed to be melting and reforming out of sync with reality. A human botanist exposed to a subspace shear, now screaming that her hands felt like they were in yesterday. Strange visual distortions plagued rescue teams, shimmering heat haze where there was no heat, objects momentarily doubling or stretching like taffy. The fabric of local reality, briefly, had torn. In the Cathar Medical Bay, Unit 734 processed the incoming reports with cold precision. Cathar physiology was resilient but brittle when pushed beyond design specifications. As the first casualties arrived, strapped to automated gurneys, the diagnostic scanners whirred, attempting to quantify the damage. For standard radiation burns or impact trauma, treatments began immediately, efficiently. But then came the anomalies. A Cathar technician whose crystalline arm seemed semi-transparent, phasing slightly in and out of visual existence. Scanner result. Localized quantum instability, structural coherence failure. Prognosis. Irreparable. Protocol. Palliative care, followed by euthanasia protocol 7 gamma. Another Cathar, caught near a gravity plating malfunction during the sheer exhibited symptoms of localized spatial distortion, their body subtly compressed along one axis, internal organs registering impossible pressure readings. Scanner result. Physical dimension variance exceeding biological tolerance. Prognosis. Irreparable. Protocol. Palliative care. Euthanasia protocol 7 gamma. Unit 734 directed its subordinates without hesitation. It was logical. These units were damaged beyond the capacity of known science to repair. Attempting intervention would waste resources and introduce unacceptable variables into the controlled medical environment. It was not cruelty. It was the rational application of established principles in the face of physical impossibility. Preserve the functional, decommission the irreparable. Meanwhile, the human sector medical bay was a scene of controlled frenzy. Dr. Alara Vance stood at the central diagnostic console, her face grim as casualty reports scrolled across the screen. The same impossible injuries were arriving here. A crewman whose skin rippled with chromatic distortions, shifting color like oil on water. Another whose biosigns flickered, vanishing from sensors for milliseconds at a time. Scanners struggled, spitting out error codes and paradoxical readings. Okay, people, listen up. Vance's voice cut through the rising panic. Standard triage protocols are secondary right now. Priority one is stabilization, no matter how weird this gets. Ignore the impossible flags on the scanners, treat the symptoms you can see, manage the pain, and keep them breathing. Giant, Anya, anything you recognize from deep space anomaly studies. Dr. Jian Li, already working over a patient whose arm seemed encased in a field of frozen time, shook his head. This isn't like the textbooks, Alara. This is actively violating them. Anya Sharma frantically cross-referenced sensor logs with theoretical physics databases. Getting fragments, temporal shearing effects, possible quantum entanglement with damaged station hardware. It's all theoretical worst-case scenarios happening at once. A chime indicated an incoming priority communication from the Cathar Medical Bay. Unit 734's synthesized voice filled the room, cool and precise. Dr. Vance, our analysis confirms multiple instances of irreparable physical paradox among incoming casualties. Continued attempts at sustaining these units violates efficient resource allocation principles. We advise implementing human sector equivalent of euthanasia protocol 7 gamma for all subjects exhibiting class 5 paradoxical symptoms. Vance's jaw tightened. Negative, Unit 734. We don't write patients off just because we haven't seen this before. We're stabilizing. Stabilization is illogical when core physical parameters are compromised. Unit 734 countered. You are engaging in futile efforts based on emotional response. Call it whatever you want, Vance snapped back, terminating the connection. Just stay out of our way. She turned back to her team. All right, forget the rule book. Time to get creative. Unit 734, finding the human response predictably illogical, yet professionally curious, established a passive remote observation link to the human medbay's primary monitors. What it observed over the next hour strained its logical processors to their limits. The first critical case was Chief Engineer O'Malley, a human whose left arm was caught in a localized temporal dilation field. The arm moved sluggishly, wounds appearing and then fading nanoseconds later as if healing and reopening in a microloop. Standard stasis fields warped uselessly around the effect. Bandages wouldn't stay applied. Scanners registered the arm as existing fractions of a second behind the rest of him. It's like a localized time-skip stutter, Anya murmured, baffled. Dr. Lee stared at the rhythmically phasing arm, then glanced at a nearby emergency cardiac cot. An idea sparked, utterly devoid of medical precedent. Defibrillator, he barked. A nurse handed him the paddles. Ilara, this is insane, but... Try it, Vance said immediately. What have we got to lose? Ignoring the machine's designated function, Lee charged the paddles. Clear, he shouted, then applied the electrical charge not to O'Malley's chest, but to the air surrounding the temporally dilated arm. Sparks flew. O'Malley convulsed. On the monitor, the temporal phasing flickered, destabilized for a moment, then settled. The arm snapped back into sync with normal time, wounds remaining visible and treatable. The Cathar observer drone, hovering silently in a corner of the Cathar medbay, registered. Action. Application of cardiac resuscitation device to non-cardiac temporal anomaly. Rationale, unknown illogical. Outcome, temporal dilation field collapse, anomalous success. Next came a Cathar scientist, brought to the human bay after their own had designated them irreparable. Their leg was molecularly entangled with a twisted piece of bulkhead, plating lying 50 feet away in a damaged corridor. Every slight movement of the leg caused the metal plate to vibrate sympathetically. Attempts to scan the leg resulted in sensor echoes from the bulkhead. Separation was deemed physically impossible without causing catastrophic decoherence, disintegration. We can't cut the leg, and we can't cut the bulkhead without potentially killing him, Lee stated grimly. Anya Sharma's eyes darted between the patient's readings and the station's engineering schematics flickering on a side screen. Quantum entanglement needs resonance to maintain coherence, she muttered. What if we disrupt the resonance? She grabbed a toolkit and sprinted out of the medbay, returning minutes later with salvaged components. Parts of a long-range communications relay sonic emitters used for detecting microfractures in the hull, and a power converter jury-rigged from a diagnostic scanner. Working frantically, she assembled a bizarre device, surrounding the affected leg with emitters. This is based on a paper about canceling FTL comms interference, she explained breathlessly. It might flood the quantum link with chaotic resonance, or it might just make things worse. She activated the device. A low hum filled the air, rising in pitch. The bulkhead panel across the station vibrated violently for a second, then went still. On the monitors, the quantum entanglement signature flickered and died. Scan him now, Anya yelled. The leg registered as normal biological matter. Get him to surgery, Vance ordered. The Cathar observer noted. Methodology. Application of non-medical sonic electronic hardware based on unrelated theoretical principles. Result. Quantum entanglement decoupled. Paradox contained. The most chaotic case involved a human security officer suffering from what Vance dubbed runaway entropy. One side of his body was unnaturally cold, frost forming on his skin despite the ambient room temperature, while the other side radiated heat intensely enough to make nearby instruments malfunction. His core temperature was plummeting, while localized areas were nearing combustion. Conservation of energy had apparently taken a vacation. The team descended into what looked like sheer panic, but was actually desperate, coordinated improvisation. They packed the cold side with industrial heating pads and wrapped it in emergency insulation foam normally used for hull breaches. They simultaneously sprayed the hot side with repurposed coolant fluid from the life support system, risking chemical burns but trying to draw heat away. It was messy, dangerous, and violated every known principle of thermal regulation treatment. Monitors shrieked conflicting alarms, but slowly, impossibly, the temperature differential began to narrow. The patient, against all odds, stabilized. The Cathar observer recorded action. Simultaneous application of extreme thermal opposites using non-standard industrial materials. Violation of thermodynamic treatment protocols evident. Result. Entropy anomaly stabilized. Outcome. Inexplicable survival. Unit 734 ceased the observation feed. Its internal processors struggled to reconcile the chaotic, illogical, physically nonsensical actions with the undeniable results. The humans hadn't followed protocols because none existed for this. They had treated violations of physics not as stop signs, but as puzzles. They used tools incorrectly, applied theories wildly out of context, driven by something the Cathar struggled to quantify. a stubborn refusal to accept defeat, an emotional insistence on trying something, anything, even if it made no logical sense. Their chaos wasn't inefficiency. It was terrifying, boundary-breaking adaptability. Their empathy wasn't a weakness. It was the fuel for an illogical persistence that seemed capable, however briefly, of telling the universe itself to wait while they worked. This wasn't medicine as the Cathar understood it. This was something else. Something unpredictable and, from a purely logical standpoint, deeply unsettling. As the station's emergency systems were slowly brought back online and the immediate chaos subsided, a strange quiet fell over the human medbay. Exhausted but alive, the team tended to their recovering patients. Several beings, human and Cathar alike, now rested in stabilization pods. Beings who, according to the rigid logic of Cathar medical doctrine, should have been designated as statistical losses hours ago. The air hummed with the low thrum of overworked life support and the lingering scent of ozone from Dr. Lee's improvised temporal defibrillation. The door slid open, and Unit 734 entered. Its crystalline form seemed almost to vibrate with suppressed cognitive dissonance. It moved directly towards Dr. Vance, who was reviewing the stabilized vitals of Engineer O'Malley. Dr. Vance, Unit 734 began, its synthesized voice lacking its usual detached certainty. Your treatment protocols for the paradox casualties, they violate established physical laws. The application of uncontrolled electrical discharge to correct temporal displacement has no theoretical basis. The use of sonic resonance based on communication theory to decouple quantum entanglement is medically unsound. The simultaneous application of extreme, unregulated thermal differentials contradicts fundamental thermodynamic medical principles. It paused, the silence stretching. Yet, the patients designated irreparable by our infallible diagnostic systems are currently viable biological units under your care. Explain your methodology. Vance looked up, meeting the multifaceted gaze of the Cathar. She was too tired for complex explanations. There's no grand methodology to explain, Unit 734, she said, her voice weary but firm. We saw patients dying in ways the books never described. We didn't have time to check the parameters or write new theories. We just had people who needed help, right now. So we threw everything we had at the problem. We tried things. Some worked, some didn't. We did what seemed necessary, what felt right, what might give them a chance. She gestured around the medbay at the recovering patients. We did what worked. Unit 734 remained motionless for a long moment, processing. Did what worked? An empirical result divorced from logical theoretical underpinning. An outcome achieved through chaotic improvisation and emotional impetus. The concept was deeply disturbing to its ordered mind. It violated everything the Cathar stood for. Yet, the evidence lay before it in the stabilization pods. Your illogical persistence has yielded anomalous results. Unit 734 stated finally, perhaps the closest it could come to admitting baffled respect. Data from this event will require significant analysis by the Dominion. It turned and exited the human medbay, leaving behind a profound sense of cognitive dissonance. The official incident report from Kepler's Hope sent ripples of disbelief and consternation throughout both the Human Systems Alliance and the Cathar Dominion, and eventually the wider galactic medical community. The Cathar sections were precise, detailing the catastrophic physics violations and the logical, unavoidable conclusion of irreparable damage for numerous personnel, complete with time-stamped euthanasia recommendations based on immutable protocols. Juxtaposed against this were the human sections. Chaotic, almost anecdotal descriptions of improvised treatments using defibrillators on time warps, communications arrays on quantum states, and industrial foam for entropy reversal, followed by the inexplicable survival rates of those same irreparable patients. For the Cathar Dominion, it was a crisis of dogma. Their entire medical framework was predicated on the predictable, the known. To accept the results from Kepler's Hope meant acknowledging that under certain extreme circumstances, human illogical improvisation could achieve outcomes superior to Cathar logical certainty. Reluctantly, cautiously, the Cathar Medical High Command authorized the formation of a new, deeply uncomfortable field of study. Xenomedical analysis of human improvisational techniques in paradoxical condition environments. They began incorporating highly classified addendums into their emergency protocols, acknowledging the potential for human factor intervention success in situations previously deemed universally fatal, though they struggled immensely with how to quantify or predict such interventions. Across the galaxy, the reputation of human doctors underwent a subtle but significant shift. They were still seen as competent healers, but the Kepler's Hope incident added a new layer, one of almost mythical unpredictability. Emergency room physicians, trauma surgeons, field medics, they became known as the specialists you called when the laws of physics themselves seemed to be part of the problem. Other species, particularly those engaged in high-risk exploration or research near spatial anomalies, began actively recruiting human medical personnel for their most dangerous missions, not just for their standard skills, but for their demonstrated, if inexplicable, talent for wresting life back from the clutches of the fundamentally impossible. A new saying began to circulate among deep space crews facing bizarre environmental hazards. If the universe says you're dead, get a human doctor. They might not follow the rules, but sometimes they seem to convince reality to bend them. Human medicine hadn't just proven adaptable, it had proven, in the face of annihilation, terrifyingly stubborn.